So now we're on lecture 3 in Rudolf Steiner's Gospel to his commentary to the Gospel of Luke. And in this lecture, he says, Steiner begins by saying that the Gospel of Luke is really Buddhism on a higher turn of the spiral. It takes over from Buddhism the idea of love and compassion and translates it into deed, into action, into something that is more of a doing than a contemplating or thinking. And so what he wants to do then is go back and review, ultimately the upshot of where he's going here is he wants to show you how the Nathan child that is descended from the priestly line, David's son Nathan, inherits the astral body of the Buddha, or what he'll say in this account, the Nirmanakaya of the Buddha will unite with the astral body of the Nathan child and rejuvenate him. So that's the goal that he's going to get to. But first he wants to go over the insights that the Buddha had and discuss the sermon that he gave at Benares and what he told to his disciples. And he says, at first he had to reacquire this fresh knowledge from previous lives. He had gone through quite a number of lives. And he told his disciples, what he tells his disciples is one thing. Just as with Christ, there's always an aside for the disciples, parables for the masses, a translation into concepts for or at least esoteric teachings for the initiates, the disciples. And he said that what I learned from my past lives was a gradual series of stages of illumination in which at first I could see into the world of light. I could see light, but I couldn't discern pictures or forms there because my enlightenment was not yet pure enough. But then I was able, at a certain stage, to discern pictures and forms and shapes in the astral world, but I could not yet discern spiritual beings. My enlightenment was not yet pure enough. Then I could hear that there were spiritual beings expressing themselves through these pictures and forms. And so he's moving along, note, through what Steiner had defined in a previous lecture as imaginative, the first lecture for the Luke commentary, as imaginative cognition, cognition by inspiration, and intuitive cognition. So he's moved sort of into imaginative cognition and being able to see the world of light and pictures and forms. And now with cognition by inspiration, he can hear the spiritual beings talking to him. But he says, I did not know what place they had in these spiritual worlds or how they got there or what actions led them to get there. My enlightenment was not yet pure enough. And then he says, so then I did see what actions led them to get to where they were at and how they got there, but I could not yet remember what my relations with them were from past lives. My enlightenment was not yet pure enough. And then finally he did, and this is the ascent to intuitive cognition, he did remember his past lives with them and how he participated with them and how that led him to his present incarnation as a Buddha, his last incarnation. So this is what he tells his disciples. And then Steiner says, so in the sermon at Benares, Steiner goes through his version of the Four Noble Truths. But before he does that, he says, now keep in mind that with regard to when we die, the astral body and the ego separate from the physical body, as well as the etheric body, separate from the physical body. That's just abandoned by the other three. It disintegrates. Then on the other side, there's a life review that occurs immediately. And all the dead that I've heard described, or all the people I've heard describe near-death experiences and in talking with the dead as well, they always say that this is the first thing that they experience. Your life review has gone through. And then over the course of about 3 days, the etheric body mostly disintegrates, but there survives from it a kind of distillation or extract, and that carries with you into subsequent incarnations. And it's that extract that creates what is known in Indian philosophy as Sanskaras. And Sanskaras are sort of like the word sounds, almost like they're like karmic scars on the subtle body that it takes with it to future lifetimes that cause cravings for existence, the thirst to come back into the world and the constant craving for existence. It's not just that we are on the physical plane and we hear sounds and we see colors, hear tones, and experience things. It's that we're driven to suffer because of these cravings. We're constantly desiring. And not only that, but the sanskaras are actually very complex because they can cause they can cause phobias. There has been a lot of research done on phobias that they actually have to do with past lives. They can cause sort of bleed-throughs where you may have been, let's say, an alcoholic in the previous life. Now you're an alcoholic again. That's a bleed-through. Or maybe somebody whipped you in a previous life or whatever and caused punishment on you. And in this life, you like to be a masochist in S&M or something like that. That's another example of a bleed-through. So these sanskaras cause these bleed-throughs, and they cause dispositions to just fall back into previous behavior patterns, and it also drives the thirst for existence, inclinations. So this is Steiner's version of talking about the Buddhist idea that all life is sorrowful because it is driven by desire. It's actually desire and fear. Steiner doesn't mention the fear part, but he focuses on this desiring aspect that drives us through these sanskaras that have to be cleansed and purified and got rid of. And they're done so through the Four Noble Truths, or Steiner's version of them, where he says that the first idea is suffering, that all life is sorrowful. And this is where the suffering comes from, the thirst for existence, driven on by these residues, these sanskaras that have infected the subtle body and are pushing it along to reincarnate, and to carry along behavior patterns, old, worn-out pathways that simply need to be cleansed out. So all life is sorrowful. The cause of it is past previous incarnations that bring with it karmic scars, karmic predispositions and inclinations to keep acting in the same way. There is, of course, the third truth, which is the cure. And the cure is nirvana. But Steiner doesn't mention nirvana. He says that the cure for it consists in the Eightfold Path of right doing, right thinking, right acting, and so forth, on and on, ad nauseum. The lists always bore me. But this is what Steiner says is the thing that that the Buddha discusses in his sermon at Benares, and that the Buddha had brought with him now the ability to, one of the things, the reason for this ignorance, he says, this avidya regarding our past lives, it's avidya, it's ignorance, and it comes from the fact that human beings are no longer clairvoyant. By the Buddhist time, most of them had lost their clairvoyant abilities. During the period of Lemuria and Atlantis, human beings had full clairvoyance. And clairvoyance consists, according to Steiner, in the ability to use the organs of the etheric body to perceive into the spiritual world. But the etheric body has been withdrawing and shrinking over time, over the course of human evolution, so that those abilities have been lost, and avidya, or ignorance, has covered over men's knowledge of their past lives and the sanskaras that are driving them to this thirst, this craving for existence. And so what the Buddha brings is the knowledge of we're left with working with the physical body and the astral body, and that Buddha wants to implant this new birth within the astral body to try and get us to perceive inwardly in the astral body where passions and desires come from, to soak this knowledge of love and compassion into it and transubstantiate it in the process into something that we have control over. So this is Steiner's version of Buddhism. This isn't official Buddhism. Steiner always reterritorializes Eastern ideas in his own and puts his own spin on them. And so he comes back down and he says that so what the shepherds then in the Luke Gospel perceive when they see that vision with the angel and the angelic hosts is the Buddha within that vision. But specifically he says, and this is wrong, he says that it's the Nirmanakaya of the Buddha. And he says there are the Trikaya, which is a Mahayana Buddhist idea, the three different bodies of the Buddha, the Nirmanakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Dharmakaya. But the Nirmanakaya is actually the historical emanation of the Buddha. It's his avatar. So it's a physical emanation. It's not an astral body. Steiner has misunderstood this. Whereas the Sambhogakaya has to do with the bliss body of the Buddha, which in Hindu philosophy would be called Saguna Brahman. That is to say, Brahman, the ultimate, but with qualities. Gunas are qualities with Saguna Brahman, such as a deity. Saguna Brahman has to do with the visionary bodies of deities. And this would be the Dharmakaya, and then, or the Sambhogakaya, and then finally the Dharmakaya then is that which is beyond all of that. It's Nirguna Brahman, Brahman without qualities, the absolute body of the Buddha, which is beyond all concepts, all thoughts, all pairs of opposites unite in it. So it's the ultimate sort of vision of the Buddha's body as Dharmakaya. None of these three really fit with what he's trying to say here, as the Buddha still operating on the physical plane, but from another world, no longer in a physical body, but from another world, having an astral body. What he should be saying is that the Buddha gives or unites his own astral body, not the Nirmanakaya, that's a physical body, and unites it with the astral body of the Nathan, Jesus child, whom he says, remember, according to Steiner's morphology of the human life cycle, that every 7 years, one of the subtle bodies is born, let's say, or unleashed. After the birth of the physical body, the etheric body works on it very hard for 7 years, up to the change of the teeth, when the etheric body is then born or released. And now it can be used for other things, such as intellectual learning, how to read and write and so forth. That lasts for 7 years. Along about 14, then the astral body is awakened at puberty, another major drastic biological change that takes place, in which now the sex drive kicks in, the new hormones, all this kind of stuff that changes. But he says that due to the climate of Palestine and certain other conditions regarding the Nathan Jesus, his astral body matured already early by 12, because he's 12 years old when he's found in the temple teaching. And at that point, once it opened up, at that point, then the Buddha's astral body was able to come into it and unite with it. Just as also, apparently, simultaneously at about the same time, Steiner doesn't say this here, but he'd said that the Solomon boy had died around the same time, and that the Zarathustra ego had simultaneously taken the place of the boy's ego and taken up residence there. So he's got the ego now of Zarathustra at 12, and also at 12 the Buddha's, not Nirmanakaya, Steiner's wrong about that, but the astral body. And by the way, it's not that necessarily the Steiner was wrong. A lot of times he borrows these terms, like Atma is actually Atman. It doesn't mean the same thing as Steiner's idea of the spirit body. Manas doesn't mean the same thing as the spirit self. Manas is the intellect, and the buddhi, the life spirit. Buddhi is another form of intellect. So he takes these terms. Part of it is that not that much was understood about the East and about Eastern philosophy at the time when he's giving these lectures in through 1907 down to 1913. New knowledge was still coming in. Hindu texts were still, and Buddhist texts were in the process of being translated. It wasn't really till the 1950s with Ananda K. Kumaraswamy and Heinrich Zimmer and scholars of that sort that real thorough, accurate knowledge of Indian philosophy and Buddhist philosophy really came across. So what Steiner is getting is obscure versions of these ideas. So it may not be his fault that he doesn't get the terms right, or that he repurposes them and re-territorializes them. Jung was guilty of the same thing. Jung would, I recall a few passages in Jung where he would equate his idea of the self with the Indian Atman. No. The Atman is the ultimate metaphysical, unqualified ground of being that is embodied within the individual. It has nothing to do with the uniqueness of who he is as a person. There's nothing unique about Atman. It's totally a unit, a homogeneous unit, a blinding white flash of pure spiritual unicity, let's say. That's just a unit. It's totally homogeneous. Whereas Jung's idea of the self is very much the DNA for this particular individual's psyche, that everything is in there that he or she is going to become in Nuke. It's going to unfold out of that seed as the unique individuation through the individuation process to produce the unique individuality that is latent within that the self, which Jung uses, let's say, with a capital S. So we have this union then. So Steiner brings us up to speed here. All he wants to make clear is how the Nathan Jesus, who's a boy of love and compassion already anyway, does inherit from the Buddha his astral body, unites with it, and it rejuvenates the boy. And it brings down a youthful sort of rebirth of Buddhism, the religion of love and compassion, but on a higher turn of the spiral now, through, in the Luke Gospel, will be translated now into deeds, into actions. So we'll get lots of stories and parables and so forth. The Luke Gospel, Steiner says, is the most concrete and easiest to appeal to the mass audience. Very comprehensible, easy to understand. It's not directed to, like the John Gospel is, to a sophisticated audience. Okay, and so that's lecture number 3 on Steiner's Gospel, commentary to the Gospel of Luke.